Good afternoon. Welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. It's finally happening after much talk. I am assembling another TH475 for me, for my 72 Nova twin turbo 6-liter build. And as often happens, due to some late night shopping and me being a parts hoarder, I am gonna at the same time build a low drag TH400. So it'll be all roller bearing. It'll have a bigger sprag, 36 element. Long story short, I bought a bunch of used parts and I'm gonna try to make something out of them because that's what I do. So I'll mix in new and used. It hopefully is good stuff. I'll probably see it tomorrow, so I'm excited about that. But the main focus of this video series is this transmission based on the Pontiac non-heavy duty 400 case that I stripped last Saturday in its own video. It was pretty ugly, full of rust, only a couple drops of oil in it. Go back and watch it. I'll wait for you. Kidding as usual. It'll be a super nice, strong transmission. It's going to have a lot of good stuff in it. It was going to be probably the end of the road as far as modifications because I don't venture too far off the 1,000 horsepower recipe. This one's, let's call it 1,500-ish, depending on whose ad you believe on transmissions for sale. And the one over there, the low drag 400, probably 1,800 to 2,000. Again, if you go by the seller's ad, yeah, there's a range. It's all relevant, you know, vehicle weight, torque is, you know, horsepower is just a fancy number. It's really torque and weight that would affect the longevity of either one, but they're both getting all three aftermarket shafts, input, main shaft, and output shaft, which substantially strengthens the Turbo 400, which was already strong enough by itself for the most part. So I guess the input shaft would be the first concern, followed by the main shaft, the output shaft. Completely unlikely you're ever going to break one. The whole lower unit is super strong. Anyway, that's what I'm doing. Let's follow along. Let's start with case prep. Believe it or not, that's a lot of work. First, what is a TH475? I get asked that question a lot. In a nutshell, over 10,000 GVW, I believe 14,000 was the number. General Motors decided that they needed straight cut planetary gear sets in the lower unit. I believe the theory behind that is a straight cut gear does not thrust either direction where an angular cut gear will. So maybe that was their thinking. You have to remember, now the internet will argue about the 475 lower unit until there is no internet anymore. That argument's never going away. But Allison transmission and turbohydromatic General Motors transmission, you're pretty much saying the same thing. They are one. And Allison transmissions, they make some that are as big as this table. So I used to work on those too. And they're all straight cut, I believe. So they knew what they were doing. They made a choice. And the rest is lore. I thought I had 3. Turns out I only had 2. One's already in the Nova. The other one, I'm making this 400 behind me into just using the 475 gear set. And the 400 over here is going to get roller thrust bearings in the angular cut lower unit. So I'll be in effect testing them both. I've referenced both cases, one being heavy duty, one is not. This one is not. A few areas you might notice. I'm just going to compare side to side, like for instance the pan rail and these pan bolt bosses, the actual thickness of the case. Now let's compare those two to the HD. On the HD, this is one solid piece. I actually relieved this on an angle when I was grinding, but these bosses, everything is one solid piece. And the case is substantially thicker everywhere and includes these 4 sets of dual ribs. That's the bell housing area. In the valve body area, you have these 2 big ribs and a lot more material running back towards the rear. And in the non-HD, you don't. It's important to mention there's no strength problem with this case. It's just the other one is substantially beefier everywhere. I haven't weighed them both, but I would expect it to be certainly heavier. And more a product of being a post-1975 transmission. You'll see there's one lug missing in the case. There's always a void over here. That's why we're going to run a case saver, but there's also a void on this side. And I use it to place my snap ring groove in. This pre-1975 metal vent transmission originally had a metal vent. It has lugs all the way around until you get to the opening, again where the case save is going to be. And I believe we've covered it to death, but one more time, this has 8 bolts, and so does the other one. Important, because I want to use all 8 bolts on my aftermarket SFI bell housing. It's absolutely a ton of work to get to this point. I love to get to this point, but I dread getting there. So it's 100% disassembly. I take the fittings out of the case. Of course, I take all the linkage apart, the linkage seal, everything, and I clean and clean and clean. On a typical transmission that you just pulled apart, still full of nice oil or even dirty oil, it's a lot easier than these two that were left to die. Don't feel bad that I cut the bell housings off of, because they were absolutely in the scrap pile. They were full of water, rusted for years and years and years. The fact that I'm going to be able to use them even surprises me. So I had to go around and inspect every orifice. I'm not using this bore, so I wasn't worried about that, but the rear servo bore, I absolutely had to make sure that staining wasn't a problem. It's not. I've Scotch-Brited and cleaned, and that's nice. I've inspected and repaired all the threads. I put a whetstone. I made it a whetstone with WD-40 and my sharpening stone, and polished the entire valve body area, so I don't want any cross leaks there. I've gone over every inch of this case and made it usable. Same story with the HD case, number 2 from the video series if you watched it. Despite hammering on all the pan bolts, they would start to back off, and I was working them back and forth and broke all but one off. And I had to weld nuts on every one of them, some of them multiple times, to get them out. I got lucky on the last 2. These 2 here, I continued to weld nuts on, and they kept getting shorter to the point I was down inside the hole, which made it easy to center punch and drill them out. So I have 2 helicoils here and 1 in the rear servo cover. Not bad, considering where this baby came from. Congratulations for making it this far. Let's start assembly. The first thing I do, before the case gets any parts in it, in case I have to do any modifications, is to check the modulator valve bore and the hole in the case where the front band pin used to be. So one thing at a time. There's 2 styles of transmission brakes, internal and external solenoid. With an internal solenoid, obviously the solenoid is internal in the pan, the modulator valve, typically unmodified, the instructions will tell you what to do with your brand of trans brake, just sits in its bore. There's an aluminum plug and the traditional modulator valve clamp, and there's no worries whether that can move freely or not. With an external solenoid, which I'm going to have, you need to make sure the modulator valve is smooth in its bore. And if it isn't, now is the time to fix that. Find out why. And with the ATD, the instructions tell me I've already downloaded them, even though I haven't got the valve body yet. But I'm going to have to do some modifications to the valve. And I will again do that and then check it in its bore before I go any further. Because if I have to make any metal or any chips or anything that's going to happen, I don't want to do that with a transmission full of parts. My next concern is the bolt that is going to replace the pin we drove out of the case for the case saver. In this case, it's a conical head bolt that'll be coming from the inside out, but it has to actually fit through the hole. when you drove the pin out, it's on the small side of 3/8. So often you have to run a drill in and out of there. If you run in the style case saver that just has a shouldered bolt, a lot of times you can just hand file that a little bit. But either way, you want to do this while the case is empty. I do it on case prep, and then I always check it afterwards to make sure there isn't soap or some reason, paint, something that's preventing me when I have a transmission half full of parts to be able to bolt up the case saver. This is a view of the case saver with the conical headed bolt sticking out through the case. This FTI unit, much like the Transmission Specialties and a few others, installs after the intermediate clutches and the intermediate clutch snap ring. It goes on top of the snap ring and acts like another big lug to hold the snap ring in the void in the case. In this style is also a shouldered bolt that's going to go up through the front band servo hole right there and thread into it. So it's very well supported. And once again, make sure this fits through the case as well while we're checking bolt holes. More items that I consider case prep. You've already seen the case savers. I'm going to put -6 fittings for the cool lines. They're straight thread. These are ICT Billet brand. They come with O-rings. I don't trust the O-rings. I'm going to install these nylon washers for now. I'm not in love with these washers because the OD is kind of big. I would prefer that size, but I'm out of them. And probably more preferred would be a copper washer. But I don't trust the O-rings, so I'm going to go ahead and put something else in its place. The kick down electrical connector through the case, I'm going to put a 7/8 brass freeze plug in it because I have no use for an electrical connector coming through the case at this point in time. I prefer the brass over steel. When I had a box of steel ones, which I used up, I had to reduce the OD a little bit because I was afraid of splitting the case. The brass ones drive in pretty easy. Just put a little sealer on them, find a driver that fits. It's a freeze plug. For the governor cover, I typically turn the stock one around backwards. For these two transmissions, I'm looking ahead toward the future, potentially wanting to run either a converter charge pressure regulator, which is similar to a mechanical fuel injection jet, where you've got a fixed orifice. In this case, you maintain about 70 pounds. Any more than that, it opens up and dumps. It needs a place to dump. So I'm going to install a 1/8" pipe plug, actually probably up here, so it's up high, less chance of leaking. Or if I want to run an actual dump valve, I'm going to need a port. So before I install these, I'm going to go ahead and just put one hole in each one that I could tee into, or worst case scenario, I'd have to remove it and maybe put another one, maybe bigger. Maybe I want 1/4 inch in the future. I don't know, but for now, while they're off and brand new in my hand, I'm going to drill and tap them, 1/8 pipe, right about there. Okay, we got some work done. I want to be clear, I'm not anti-O-ring. In fact, I'm a big fan of the O-ring. However, in this application with straight threads, there's no place for the O-ring to go. It just squishes out, makes a mess, and eventually it's going to leak. Probably catch fire, burn to the ground. Well, you know, I'm getting pretty dramatic, but in this application, these fit pretty well, even though I don't like the OD. But I'm still going to source some correct copper washers and probably swap them out. The governor cover came out nice. Drilled at 21/64. Tapped at 1/8" pipe. Put the nice AN plug in there. I wasn't feeling the silver bolts that it came with. I felt they were kind of short, and I was really digging the gold look anyway, so I used some of my own stock. Gave it the gold finger touch. Same with the freeze plug, 7/8, the Midas touch. Gold and gray. And like I do with most all my transmission rebuilds, I drilled and tapped the vent hole, 1/8" pipe as well. In this case, it was a plastic vent case. Requires you to drill a hole, 21/64. I actually hold it on an artificial angle. I've covered this before. Also tap it on an artificial angle. You can't really notice it by eye, but it lets the tool clear this indentation in the case. And on the inside, it moves the hole in alignment with the gasket instead of getting closer to the sealing surface. We've covered this at least 50 times. In the HD case, which was a 1972 metal vent transmission, the hole is already the right size, actually slightly big, but I still purposely tap it on a slight angle, and it comes out the same way for the same reasons. Makes it a lot easier to install the fitting, and when I'm done, if I didn't point it out, you wouldn't notice, probably. This whole video series on assembling the race TH475 is going to be very detailed, very slow moving probably. I have other videos, if you're interested, that move along somewhat faster, but it's not a race. It's more about the details. So follow along if you're interested. Like, share, subscribe. I hear a lot lately that some of the subscriptions get automatically deleted. I do notice my total goes up and down, so if you were subscribed and want to stay that way, and you wonder why I haven't posted a video lately, it's probably because YouTube unsubscribed you. So just take a look if you don't mind. And be sure to hook up your grandmother, your mother, your aunt. Maybe while your grandmother's sleeping, put my videos in continuous loop in the background. It's good for the watch hours. Totally kidding, but hey, crazy things have happened. Like, share, subscribe. We'll be back on this soon. Tomorrow, probably.